Welcome to FitBody Lifestyle, the show where we dive deep into the world of fitness, health, business, relationships, and the art of living a balanced life. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Greg, and we're here to give you the benefit of our experiences in the fitness and bodybuilding industry, the corporate world, running a business, personal development, and building healthy relationships.
Whether you're sweating it out in the gym, hustling in your business, or seeking balance in your everyday life, you're in the right place.
So lace up those sneakers and grab that water bottle, and let's get ready to transform our minds, our bodies, and our lives.
Welcome back to another episode of FitBody Lifestyle. We are so happy that you've joined us here, and we have an amazing guest today, Brannon. And we're going to talk about the three main dysfunctions of bikini competitors and what kind of dysfunctions you say. We're going to get to that in just a minute. But first, we're going to have Drew tell us, what is your check-in word today?
Thoughtful.
That suits you.
Always thinking.
Always thinking. Always. The wheels are turning. I can see them going.
Yes.
And we've learned a ton working together, especially with some of these top bikini Olympians. And I really feel like you've been able to kind of boil it down and figure out like what's going on with them from a movement, training, physique standpoint. So that's really what we're going to focus on today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, going back to us starting these evals.
Oh, sorry, before I'm going to stop you. I need you to tell them a little bit about yourself first.
Thank you, because I was going to do that.
Before Papa Bear gets me. Sorry. Introduce yourself. Sorry, Drew. And then we'll jump in.
My name is Drew Brannon. I am a FitBody Fusion coach, proud husband of Jordan Brannon. I don't know.
That's good.
No, I love that.
You also own
Pinellas Ultimate Strength House is a gym in Seminole, Florida. I don't know. I'm tired. Sorry.
Yeah, full disclosure, everybody. We flew in late last night on a flight after a very busy weekend. And it is an excuse. And so if we a couple of ground rules for this conversation is, first of all, we are very aware of not wanting to live in always land or neverville. So what we are talking about are observations that we have made. This work is ongoing, always evolving. We learn something new every day. If you hear something that sounds like an absolute, it ain't an absolute, because there are very few absolutes.
Right. There's lots of nuances.
That's right.
And this has really been from data collected from working with, how many?
We've got to be over 80 at this point.
Evaluations of top level.
And not even, and I think that's what's cool. It's not even just top, right? We've got true novice. We have data from true novice all the way through Olympians, which makes this conversation.
It levels the playing field.
Yeah, right. A lot. Because I'll be honest, one of the first things, since moving out here and starting these evals is I assumed way too much, right? And I assumed every Olympian, every pro athlete or pro competitor, knew how to properly train, perfect, flawless execution of movement patterns and things like that. But that's not always the case, because a lot of it depends.
It does, and a lot of it's learned behavior over time and habitual, movement patterns. Some of it's unconscious. That's why there's so much value in video analysis. But I would say it's like this, Drew. It's what we talk about all the time with some of the, not the flaws, the gap in studies. And the gap in studies is that a lot of the studies that have been performed over time, whether it's for medications or exercise, don't necessarily apply to this population. And so a lot of the data that comes out, well, that's great. And then we get to it depends, because how does it then overlay into this specific form of athletic endeavor? And some of it does and some of it doesn't. So that's where the work of the work is really to figure out, okay, how do we not just, we are very mindful that we do not make data-only decisions, or data-only recommendations. We make data-informed decisions. There's the data, but then there's the art, and this is an aesthetic sport. So there is always going to be that, I just went to Alwaysville, or Always Land. There is usually this blending of art, science, and experience, and objectivity and subjectivity.
Yeah, and I mean, data is great. Studies are great. I'm fortunate enough to be a co-author on a few studies in my undergrad, and one of the first ones I was part of was blood flow restriction training, right? And there was issues I had within that study that was conducted and things like that, that it's a lot of times studies are designed to produce a certain outcome, whether that's right, wrong, and different, just we have to keep that in mind. Like a lot of times studies are created to favor an outcome. So
That's right.
We just have to remember that.
So we're always collecting.
Always.
So what we're going to share today is really what we've collected.
Yes.
Specifically, you've been collecting from working with all this whole myriad of athletes hands-on that can apply to people can ask themselves the questions after hearing this.
Yes, and this will be heavily leaning into the bikini category, okay? And the reason I am going to lead with that is most of it has to do with the posing, with some of these dysfunctions and the amount that the girls are posing. So I am going to just kind of put that out there that this what I am going to say and kind of talk about in terms of the three main dysfunctions that we have kind of collectively, gathered data on is going to be heavily in the bikini division. So the first one I really, really want to kind of dive into is, we get feedback all the time is upper glute. So the adductor versus abductor relationship. So if we think about it in the most simplest term or way, our body, when we move through a joint, something has to lengthen, something has to shorten. And if we look at the abductors and the adductors, in order to get into abduction or going away from the midline, the adductor, for the most part, needs to lengthen to get into abduction. So a lot of times, our girls that we're seeing, their adductors are overly developed and tighter, and abductors tend to be weaker. I do attribute most of this to high cardio, whether it's an incline walk. A lot of girls that like to do stairs, that unilateral, that step up, produce a lot of force with adductors as well as some like sumo training. We know that the adductors are very strong and powerful muscles. If we really go back to, kind of, we were talking on one of previous episodes is like my hands-on experience training youth athletes. We want strong adductors for force production and explosiveness and change in direction and things like that. But we have to be mindful of that with the bikini, developing, the proper shape that we're looking for out of the glutes. So that first dysfunction that I like to address is the adductor, releasing the adductor, getting the abductor or glute med kind of fired up and activated through a series of whether it's foam rolling, static and dynamic stretches, and then the priming, which would be the activation portion of the glute, is kind of what we're recommending and seeing for most girls within this kind of complex within the hip and the adductor and abductor.
Yeah, and just kind of in layman's terms, so when we're talking about adductor, specifically we're talking about that inner thigh.
Correct.
And the big thing is that the judges in the bikini division don't want to see that deep separation between the hamstring and the adductor. So sometimes when that gets overdeveloped, when that's really not what the intention is to target, then we start to throw off that balance.
Yeah, and too in their back pose, if we start to see like a ton of shape within the inner, adductor, it can throw off the balance with quad sweep to, adductor. So the girls, I get why the girls like those sumo movements. I do, right? They're fun, they're heavy, they can pull a lot of weight with them. From a mechanical advantage standpoint, I get it. But we've got to be mindful of that. And I think we can really get into some nuances of how and I'm sure a lot of you listeners love to point your toes out when you train glutes, right? Because you can feel the glute a little bit better. And in some cases, there's application. It depends, right? That's our big thing that we like to say is, we just have to remember that we are shortening, that glute when we are turning the toe out and we are lengthening the adductor. And I'm a firm believer in trying to get through a full range of motion. So we want to get through a full lengthen and a full shortened state of the muscle. So just being mindful of that, because we can kind of feed into that dysfunction if we continuously do things with those toes pointed out. Not to mention just a lot of when we look at gait mechanics and something really, when I looked early on in my career was, rehabbing ankles from, ankle sprains with soccer and football players is really studying gait mechanics and just how a lot of people walk. So that can really impact the kinetic chain from the ground up and really kind of showing in the hips. So that's just something we're really attacking in our assessment process. So that kind of lumps in together the first main dysfunction that we're addressing within the bikini competitor. That does not mean everybody has this issue. I did an eval last week with an athlete that was in town. Adductor, fantastic, was great. She had no issues between the ad and abductor relationship. So like I said on a previous podcast, like most of the time it's at least one, most of the time it's two dysfunctions of the three. Often it's one, often it's all three, but most of the time there's at least two of them within a bikini competitor. So yeah, that would be kind of our first one. Our second main dysfunction we go into is the anterior pelvic tilt issue within the bikini competitors. I think we have to remember that the back pose is an anterior pelvic tilt in nature. And a lot of these girls are repetitively posing check-ins, practicing posing, things like that.
So, but really quick, anterior pelvic tilt, because I mean, you're kind of explaining it through explaining that that's part of the back pose.
Yeah, when we shorten the low back and lengthen the abdominal wall, we get into anterior pelvic tilt.
So we're dumping the pelvis.
Yeah, over. that arch in the low back feeds into a lot of low back tightness. And then the opposite, right? So I said earlier on that if something shortens on one side through the joint, it must lengthen on the other. So if we're shortening the low back, QL specifically, quadratus lumborum, we're lengthening the abdominal wall. So a lot of that then feeds into abdominal weakness, and so many girls are
even with etched abs.
Right, and abs is different than like true core stability and strength, right? So we're talking more of the deeper muscles, not just that superficial layer of the abdominals. But when we do get into this anterior pelvic tilt with a shortened posterior aspect and a lengthened anterior, we tend to get really weak in our midsection. And something that I preach to the girls is like, these national level shows, these pro shows, I've seen national level call outs where it's like 8-9 minutes long for that first call out when they're moving girls around. And we need to be super strong in our midsection to hold that front pose, keep that waist tight. When we transition in the side glute, right? How many times do we see girls just like release their abdominal wall because they're still trying to arch, they're still trying to push, but then they got to still try to keep this tight. So
Posing is one of the hardest things that we do. Yeah. So if you're not doing your homework, then you're not going to be able to hold the pose.
And if you're not conditioned. So there's conditioning in the gym, but there's also conditioning for core stability and core tightness and
endurance.
That's right. And so what you talked about at the national show, there was a pro show within the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I know because I recorded it. It was 8 minutes and 37 seconds long, where they had the first call out there as they were looking at them, and you could see certain athletes were fading towards that 5, 6, 7, 8 minute mark, and understandably, but at the same time, it's like, did you prepare for this? And that's what we get into this core stability.
Well, that's part of the reason they sometimes keep them that long, though, because if it's that close and they're having a hard time deciding, they'll keep working them until somebody doesn't hold it. So you could go from first place to down the line, and we've seen it happen. So.
Well, we see it happen in men's bodybuilding all the time, where they will keep them out there, and these guys are holding these poses, and I mean they're burning through calories, and again that's why the nutritional aspect of getting them on stage is a different animal than what it is for bikini. But at the same time, we do take that into consideration with our peaking, is to make sure that, hey, look, you're going to be out there, and there's a conditioning aspect to this, there's a nutrition aspect to this, there's a preparation aspect to this.
Yeah, and I think going back to the anterior pelvic tilt, a lot of girls complain of back pain when they're training, and really it's because of the whole anterior pelvic tilt issues and how they're not necessarily pulling with their glutes and hamstrings. Instead of like they initiate movement with their chest, which if we think about biomechanics and like a mechanical advantage, I understand why it happens. It's an easier classification of a lever to pull with, but really teaching the girls to brace properly, maintaining a neutral lumbar spine. So by no means are we suggesting getting into like a posterior pelvic tilt to offset being an anterior pelvic tilt posing. More of a fan of just like a neutral lumbar spine into thoracic spine as well. And it's going to help isolate glutes, right? If we really understand that we're not just tilting the pelvis like this to grow our glutes, like we're missing tension within the glutes. So I know I get asked all the time, whoa, should I be wearing a waist trainer, like belt, like that whole issue? And we've talked about this a lot, and it does depend. But for the most part, I am not a fan of belting in pretty tight. I'm more of a fan of, checking your ego at the door when you walk into the gym, really learning how to abdominally brace and go through a proper range of motion with correct, alignment within the lumbar thoracic spine. A cue and a tip that I like to really give girls to think about is, for a hinge or a thrust, would be, the femur is one long bone. And unfortunately or fortunately, our spine is a bunch of little bones. And I found that this cue really helps with any hinge or thrust, that if we set our midsection and pretend like it's one long bone through abdominally bracing, so I can just lock that core down tight and then, truly get into hip flexion and hip extension, that's going to create the most tension on the glutes, resulting in, the greatest stimulus. But I think just locking down that midsection, help neutralize the core, is going to feed into kind of some of the most, optimal gains. We just have to remember that these girls are posing a ton, right? And it's tough because, yes, we want them good at posing, but when they're training, we need to almost be doing the opposite of what they're doing when they're posing. And that's a lot to kind of digest and really accept sometimes.
It is. And this is a bikini wellness, men's physique to a certain extent, probably not as much, but mostly bikini and wellness in particular, they are asymmetric posing, where you are only posing on one side. And because of that, yeah, but wellness does that front pose, and yeah, you're right. They do more quarter turns, but bikini probably is the most pronounced division for asymmetric posing, I would say, and because we've talked about this before. We'll talk about it again. Is the desire to pose on both sides, and it's interesting that we're not. If you think of posing as yoga. And really it is, because you're contorting your body in a specific way. When you are more mobile, you're able to get into better poses than when you're not mobile. Mobility issues become a real limiter or an opportunity, depending on how you want to look at it, for how we go about it. But because bikini is such an asymmetric posing site, if you are not practicing on both sides and identifying your movement limitations and your movement opportunities, then there are going to be imbalances in that experience or that expression.
Well, and translating that a little bit for what we're talking about now with the tilting of the pelvis, the opposite of that is going to be doing a hinge forward. So just something to think about too. If you're doing a lot of posing and you're constantly cranking that pelvis, but you're never counter stretching. It's like when you talk about yoga, you would never go into a yoga class and you're only arching. You're never going to fold forward, then you're going to start having some issues. And that's kind of what you're talking about. But the other benefit of doing what you're saying is that you're also working those internal abdominal muscles that are going to ultimately help with posing, because you're creating that endurance.
Yeah. And it's a lot of pelvic floor, right? And especially our masters athletes, right? Being mindful of pelvic floor, and, they've had kids and things like that. So, another thing I did want to touch on too is kind of the hip flexor aspect. If we are in anterior pelvic tilt, the flexors are also shortened. So when we try to get into a thrust, a lot of girls will then struggle getting into hip extension. So then what they do is they anterior pelvic tilt to get more range of motion, but it's not true range of motion. So
it's range of motion, but not dedicated towards the targeted
hip extension,
muscle.
right? Yeah. So you're robbing Peter to pay Paul at that point. But nonetheless, it's something a lot of girls struggle with. I mean, I know Jordan doesn't mind when I, talk about some of the issues that she's struggled with training, and she still struggles with it, right? I know that part of the reason we've been able to keep her waist so tight as we've grown her glutes and her back is...
Which everybody's been talking about.
Everybody's talking about, yeah. It's not the Chipotle. But...
Good one.
Anyways.
Nobody will understand that, but...
Oh, they will.
Some people
no.
Yeah.
They're going to trust me.
Nobody.
They're going to act like
All
they're
right.
not. But yeah, if I get another screenshot of that one, that's going to be funny. But anyways, I've been on her really hard about, really working on her core and keeping it tight from the inside out. You know, Jay doesn't do any crunches. There's no crunches in her program. We do have a single leg lowering exercise that we do for her that is core driven to help her go through a dynamic range with core stability. But other than that, like, she's just really learned how to keep her core tight as she hinges and thrusts and things like that. But nonetheless, I think that's the biggest one that we see a lot of content on, the whole anterior pelvic tilt, triple extension, true hip extension, things like that. It gets confusing for a lot of girls. I think if we just break it down in the most simplest form and just understanding a true range of motion for that athlete. And another thing that I think athletes should keep in mind is part of the reason why we do prep and prime with our girls and their warm-up is to give them biofeedback before they start that session of what to expect within range of motion. So if we just had we were crazy show weekends last weekend, sat around the airport, flight was delayed a little bit, sat on a 3-hour flight home. If I try to train right now and went through my prep and prime, I'm gonna get biofeedback and say, hey Drew, like your range of motions today are gonna be rough. So then I might need to spend a little bit more time getting my body, warmed up and ready to properly train. And we have found through these dysfunctions that if we spend more time prepping and priming the body, we need less stimulus. We need less volume. The girls come out of their prep and prime like, oh my gosh, I already have a glute pump. We haven't even trained it. We haven't even done the actual stimulus, but they're connected, they're feeling it, they're feeling good. Now I don't have to give them a bunch of volume to get them to activate their glutes. So I think that's been one of the biggest game changers for our girls, specifically in this kind of anterior pelvic tilt and then adductor-abductor relationship for glute development.
We've talked about this, you and I, a bit about just the prep and prime, but the whole concept of the mental aspect, the mental framework of training. And Jay is really the embodiment of this, where she, and I've shared this quote before, she said, well, I walk out of the gym as mentally exhausted as I am physically exhausted or more. And the reason for that is that it's not just going in and mindlessly lifting the weights. It's going in and knowing what to feel, where you should be feeling it, how to then initiate that muscle engagement if you are not. And the prep and prime is really there to do that, to prime. I mean, it's prep and prime. These are not magic words, or they just are words that really describe the fact that you are priming the muscle for the work that you want it to go through. And if you're not connected with that muscle mentally, you're not thinking about the contraction, you're not connected with that contraction, then yeah, you are going to struggle that day. You might be able to go through the motions, you might be able to push heavy weight, but did we get where are we at that efficiency spectrum? Are we at the high end of the efficiency spectrum where you've really connected with the muscle? And I think we found that it ain't weight driven.
No, and it's, I always ask the girls, like, the level of internal work. The issue with that question, right, is it's subjective, right? Because how do you measure it, right? But at the same time, like, I can say this, we don't have any Olympian doing 4-plate hip thrusts. Like, we don't. I think when they top out, I think we've got one of them doing 2-plate hip thrusts. Like, progressive overload does not just mean more weight. It doesn't. We're going to sacrifice something else within the physique to fit the bikini standard.
Right.
If we keep progressing.
But it makes such good content for IG.
It makes great content for IG. But you want to know what I think makes better? Pro wins.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. 100%.
Yeah,
but I might be partial.
No, and I mean, I do think that, that is something to think about is that the proof's in the pudding, like you do, when it comes to some of the junk content that's out there, it's funny because we get people bring stuff to us all the time. Oh, what do you think about this or that or the other, And, at the end of the day, go, okay, first of all, what are the results? But one other thing always to keep in mind is that sometimes people do things just for the sake of content. So they might not even do the exercise that they're demonstrating, but they need fresh content to keep eyeballs on their page. So, I mean, when it comes down to what really works, there's not 50 different exercises. It's, and I know people love the variety and the fun and like, look at all this cool, thing that this person's done. I've never done, I've never seen this before. This must be the magic, the magic exercise that's going to work this particular body part, which we know in reality, it's more for fun and for content and for entertainment purposes, let's say.
I mean, the muscle has to lengthen, the muscle has to shorten. There's a hinge is a hinge. Like a thrust is still a hinge in a lot of ways.
But Drew, as you talk about a hinge as a hinge, I mean, I don't know that everybody has kind of, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. I don't think we talk about it very much in terms of, and I mean, the easiest example mechanically is a door hinge. And the two sides are, there's only one thing that's moving, which is that inner cam, but the other sides are static, are stable, stationary, rigid.
That's good. That's a great example, actually, because they should be.
Right.
And that's where the anterior pelvic tilt issue, it's not a true, right? Because then one of the levers is compromised when it's going through that range of motion. So I love that analogy with the door.
Right, which is why you said that pretending like your backbone's a straight bone so it can't tilt.
Yeah, but there's only so many ways we can lengthen and shorten a glute, right? And I mean, it doesn't matter the level that we're at. A lot of times our feedback is more upper glute.
You're right.
Girls.
Yeah.
You can be an Olympian, you can be a top Olympian, and you're still going to get feedback from more upper glute. Just understand that, right? But that doesn't mean we need to come up with some crazy variation to do it.
Oftentimes, the biggest variation is time.
Yeah, and I think
or improving form,
right?
Because this is where are you actually working your upper glute?
So many times when I do the evals with the girls and we go in our day 2 and we do a thrust. And they start loading up plate after plate after plate. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna let you do it. They do it. Then I strip it down to one plate. I'm like, okay, now let's do this correctly. And they can't do 4 or 5 reps, right?
That's wild.
And I know a lot of girls will get their first program from me after the eval, and it's 6 working sets of 4 to 6 reps. They go home, they go to the LA fitness trainer that's gonna take them through it, and wow, they want you doing 6 sets of 6? Why? Well, that's all they can do. Correctly. They can only abdominally brace under load for 6 reps right now. And that's okay. That's where the girls are sending training footage, right? So then it's okay, cool. Now I can back you down on sets. I'm a huge relative volume guy, right? So relative volume is sets times reps times intensity. We get a nice pretty number. We are looking for an increase of 12.5% of increase in relative volume over a 4-week period of time. Cool. What does that even mean? That's why I like to give reps and set ranges. Allow the girls to kind of modulate that load within them, because a 6x6 we know is not optimal for hypertrophy. I'd ideally like to see them more in that 4 rep or 4 set, 8 to 10, 12 rep range, but not if
they can't do it.
If they can't do it, then why?
Yeah.
What are we doing, right? So that's when we'll just start to modulate volume. And I know I talked about this on one of the other podcasts about with Adair and having to just modulate her volume was really the only change we had to make, but her movement stayed the same. So as they become more efficient, which that's the goal, we want them to become more efficient within these movements, well, then now we can start kind of favoring more reps and bringing down the sets. It won't take as long for the girls to get through their workouts, but there's been times where, we talk after I do the eval and I'm like, sorry, Jamie, right now we're going to have to go heavy on the set side with low reps until they can really learn how to do this. And then we feed into tempo, and there's other variables of progressive overload than just stacking on plate after plate after plate to, progress.
Right. That's where you got to check the ego at the door.
Well,
and when they've been used to doing that, sometimes it's hard.
I do want to really hit on that. We've said that several times, that check your ego at the door. That's just not a cliche or something that we say. It really, and it's, this is not a criticism. This is an observation of CrossFit, which I love, and I did CrossFit for years. But one of the things that happens with CrossFit, what's that?
You would.
Well, one of the things that happens in CrossFit is when you go in the box and everybody's doing at their level, but they're ahead of you, or you perceive that they're ahead of you. It's so easy to get into that ego mindset of, I got to up my weight, I got to do this, because that competitive mindset comes out. And there's a good part of that in terms of training up, but there's also a bad aspect of that is, am I being driven by my ego right now, or am I being driven by my my proprioception? How am I feeling? What's my body feel like in this moment? Am I really connected with that? Am I really going to follow proper form, or am I going to prioritize doing the weight over the movement efficiently? And I do think, with people working out in gyms, that can be a factor, especially if you're working out in a gym where people are coming up to you and say, "Oh, you look so amazing. Do you compete?" All those other things that happen. There's a lot of ego stimulus that can happen in the gym that can affect your workout. And that's why, head down, headphones on, focus on what you're feeling. I don't care whether you play music. I mean, honestly, I know some person that used to go in the gym with headphones on. They didn't play them. They wanted to
I know a lot of people that do
but
that.
they just did it just to discourage people from talking to them, because look, they're there to train. They're there to do a job. And if you're a professional athlete, that's your job. So this checking the ego at the door has got to be something that's more than just words. It's got to be something that you are really focused on connecting. And that applies for when you're going to the gym. Hey, if you're having a bad day, hey, today I'm really going to prioritize form. I'm going to lower my weight by 30% because I know I just don't have that energy today, but I'm really going to get the work out of it. We've talked about this a lot. Some of those workouts are the best workouts you get. Because you're really just focused on that precision of form.
Well, I also think it's important to think about what's your goal. I mean, if you're a CrossFitter, your goal is one thing. If you're a power lifter, your goal is something very different than what we're talking about, which is an aesthetic sport, and we're having to really pinpoint for a specific look. So it's kind of interesting, like considering like what is the ultimate goal, and I think that has to be considered in style of training. So
yeah, and it's there's times you have to have an honest conversation with an athlete. Like, you might love to train glutes 4 days a week, but if we're imbalanced, like, you can't be upset when we are, at the tail end of first call at a national level show because we didn't deliver on the feedback. And I think that's something, like, we hyper focus on glutes. Sure.
And we had multiple people this past weekend get feedback that their glutes were too big.
Right. And they're overpowering.
So there is such thing as too big, guys.
Yeah. And I it's balanced, top to bottom, front to back. So I think.
And it wasn't our athletes, just to be clear.
But anyways.
So number 3, what's the third?
So thoracic rotation. So because the girls, thoracic rotation, so the middle spine, if you will, being able to sit into that glute and then rotate and open up however much you may or may not need to open up, depending on your physique and your balance. The inability to do it on the opposing side. So funny story, we did an eval, probably be like 6 months ago now, and we were up in the posing room and we were posing, and the athlete hadn't competed in a while, and just something looked off in the front pose, but we worked through it, and then I took her down for an eval, and I started doing some of the testing with her, and I was like, "Are you sure that's your front pose side?" And she like stood up, hit it, and then hit her other side and like opened up just fine. And then we realized like she actually was posing the wrong front pose side for us originally. So you can learn a lot, right? Just through the assessment and catch a lot. So really being able to, rotate both ways evenly is ideal, right? And then something we've also had come up too is activities of daily living. Whereas depending on somebody's career and what they do for a living is a huge factor in the equation of imbalances and any orthopedic issues that may or may not come up with sitting at a desk. It's like forward kyphotic posture, a lot of shoulder impingement issues that can happen. And sure, we don't need back necessarily from a bikini standpoint, right? Our hair is covering most of it. But if we need to have some sort of row variation, something to help really stabilize those deeper postural muscles to help overhead press, more effectively and less pain. There's application for that, right? Maybe not specifically within the judging criteria. We need like back thickness, but there are cases based on somebody's, line of work or how they've developed through their previous training styles where we may have to implement a row. I know personally, I'm a huge fan of before going overhead, adding in some like posterior delt activation to help set the GH or glenohumeral joint before pressing. So there are things like that to consider as well that we've had come up.
that's been, I feel like, such a big game changer for us is really doing these in-depth analysis and seeing, is there an issue? They're not able to twist one direction as much as they are the other direction. They're locked up somewhere. And that's where, that prep and prime, like you've been doing with the athletes, so you're getting them ready and then adding in exercises that are going to help strengthen whatever the weaker side is. It might be, there's just so many things. And I talked a little bit about, sometimes it's a body work issue.
Well, I was going to say body work's huge. Like we're pushing body work hard right now with our girls.
Yeah.
I feel like.
And mobility training.
Yeah.
I mean, yoga is not in your plan because we like the word or we're spiritual people or whatever. Those may be true, but the yoga aspect of your training is really there to build in that mobility. And part of it, the part of the prep is to build mobility before you train, because if you're locked up, you're just not going to be training as efficiently through that range of motion. But it's all related. And we rode to the Olympia a couple weeks ago, and there was a lot of discussion about, especially at the pro ranks. But whether you're a true novice or you're thinking about getting in the sport, what I'm going to talk about right now is really just applicable to you, and this is applicable to everybody, which is this: if you want to be a pro, act like a pro. And when you're acting like a pro, and that doesn't just apply to this sport, but anything where you want to be a pro, details matter. And when you get to a certain level, those details matter even more. So as you're starting at the bottom and you're building your way up, the details matter, but there are so many details. So it's managing the ones that is prioritizing certain things, because if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So you got to prioritize those things as you're working your way up. And then once you get to that level, especially when you're at that Olympian level, man, the distance between first and 46 on that Olympia stage is just so minute. And we hear this from the judges. And so the details matter, and the details in posing, the details in presentation, the details in hair and makeup and the glam, all those things matter. And as we talk about the training aspect, these details matter because if you take 5 reps a day for 300 days, I mean, that adds up. And so day 1 may not make a difference, day 5 may not make a difference, but you get to day 65, day 75, and those 5 reps every day are making a difference. So it's the accumulation or amalgamation of that work over time that's really manifesting in the physiques that we're seeing in the assessments that you're doing. So that's why activities of daily living become such a huge player.
Controlling controllables. We talk about this all the time. And, I'm really big at having movements in for the girls that, our girls are healthy, right? Our girls compete a lot. Well, if we get feedback that we need a little bit more tie-in in between, the first show and the second show, I'm not ripping apart a training block. Like, these girls have now gotten so good at these movements that I can say, okay, let's go tie-in focus this week. They know what that means on how to shift that movement.
Same exercise.
We're not now fighting they're sore because it's a new movement or some crazy uncontrollable variable because we're going peak to peak to peak, right? Like we need to control the controllables to produce the same or, the desired look for the next week that we've built in with their program, their prep and prime. We can lead into like, hey, we need to spend a little bit more time on this aspect of your warm up this week and just deliver on the feedback that we get. And goes back to winning shows, right? Delivering the feedback and having a controllable outcome.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the lifestyle aspect, and something that came into mind for me is when I was competing, my kids were younger. So I was always holding them or holding their much stuff that they always, as a mom, you always, and it was just like my right side was so off balance with my left side, both from a size standpoint, but just also like how it was locked up and everything. And so I had to create, some opportunities for some unilateral movements to and then I also was just paying attention, whenever I would just shift them to my other side, just so that I wasn't always going to that right side. So it's kind of interesting when you kind of start drilling down and figuring out like what is a person doing and what might be causing some of these things. And then also like when we talk about body work, I did want to bring up like that's not going in for a Swedish massage and you got to find someone that knows how to work on someone specifically that's in the bodybuilding world, also considering like how close are you to your show, because of potential bruising or inflammation, some of the different techniques that, there's so many great techniques out there now, but you got to find someone good.
I think sleeping too. A lot of people don't realize like how they sleep. Yeah, just think about 8 hours. Hopefully, our athletes are sleeping 8 hours, but yeah, like if they're sleeping some certain way, like that body's stuck like that in that pattern for 8 hours. So it's a huge part of, being ready for that session and, working through any imbalances. And I go back to like working in a physical therapy clinic and like really understanding, what happens within, returning somebody to sport or post-op and how we can really undo some of these imbalances. And a lot of people end up in physical therapy because of just like an activities of daily living thing with a shoulder issue, a back issue, a hip issue. So being able to help navigate that for the athletes is really important. One other thing I did kind of want to talk about, I touched on a little bit, was the waist trainer belt kind of thing. And I'm not saying no. I want to go back to like no absolute statements. There is application, and I think that the application is like more of a biofeedback of if someone was walking around and just like tapping you in the core and belly all day, like you would abdominally brace. And I think, getting people reminded to, brace and have a good posture, kind of like you are, not how I'm just sitting here slumped, but
because I've seen too many episodes with me like this.
I feel like that's what I'm gonna look like. But I think that's the application there, and really reminding and putting it on the forefront to activate their core and not just, sit around all day like this or have that poor posture. So many times we'll see athletes in the room, they're checking in or they're in line to check in with us, and I just see them sitting there like favoring one hip or something like that. And those are all things that have to be considered when really diagnosing a physique. And
My hope for the people listening to this right now is that they're doing what we're all doing here as we're talking about it too. Is I'm checking my posture. I'm moving my pelvis a little bit forward because I realized that my spine was rolling a little bit. And the thing that I really, if there's a challenge that I want to put out, I love putting out the challenges. And so the challenge is that for anybody that's listening to this, just spend a moment thinking about your day and being present in your day and just saying, okay, I'm at my desk every day. Where's the level of my desk? Where's the level of my chair? How are my arms positioned? How do I feel when I get up? If I get up, am I getting up frequently through the day, or am I staying there for hours upon end? If I'm staying there at hours upon end, what's my posture? These are the kinds of questions that create your awareness. And once you have that awareness, then you can start building the habits around those. Okay, hey, I tend to slump at my desk when I'm at 45 minutes. So I need to set an alarm, and every 45 minutes or every 30 minutes, I need to stand up and stretch. These are small actions that you can take to counteract activities of daily living because they do add up. And again, it's that thing of, the death by 1,000 cuts is that it's not the first cut that'll kill you, but when you get to that 900 mark, man, you're bleeding a lot. And so make your life better by just being thoughtful and aware of what is going on. You can do it once and then impose. And what I would say is this, is that do it once, identify one thing, not 5 things. Identify one thing that you're going to do differently. So, hey, I'm going to stand up every 30 minutes, or I'm going to check my posture. They actually have posture levelers where you can put this device on your shirt, and if you lean too far forward or lean too far back, it will give you a feedback that tells you, like a vibration feedback to help you get more upright. But identify that one behavior and then work on that, rather than saying, okay, I'm going to change these 7 things, because the reality is you're not going to change 7 things. Focus on building one habit and then working the rest.
That's great advice. And one other thing I wanted to add to that is, like, you think about it, you're only in the gym for maybe an hour, hour and a half. You're in your body 24/7. So it really can be a lot of those things that we're doing outside of there. And something else that popped in my head too is, like, we've got athletes that have scoliosis and things like that. So there's other things.
I also talk about leg length too.
Yeah.
I've been seeing there's a lot of leg length discrepancies, one side versus the other. And that athlete may need, a little bit different setup. So that's
and Drew, is there a difference between somebody who has a anatomical difference in bone length on one side versus the other, versus the pelvic tilt? But is there any difference relative to the approach to that from a training perspective?
Yeah, I mean, when we look, so like scoliosis, really, you end up seeing some bit of leg length at the end, right, with scoliosis, because one side of the hip is higher than the other typically, right? And most of the times that's formed from like a muscular imbalance, some, if it's really young, right, there could be something hereditary going on there. But for the most part, it's some sort of movement pattern or continuous movement pattern has developed that scoliosis. And then we start to see the hip shift. And then that's where you get into like when we really start looking at a hinge pattern, one hip's higher than the other. One of the movements I really enjoy is the half kneeling dumbbell RDL. But if we have somebody that has a drastic hip shift, that might not be a good movement for them, because when they're kneeling on one side, one hip's already higher, it can really throw off that tension between the two. So yeah, it kind of just depends once again, but how we would address that. Sometimes we have to do like a heel lift or an orthotic. I've had to do things like that in the past for athletes to help level them out, but just kind of.
The one thing I'm glad you reminded me of this is we trained, or you were training some athletes in San Antonio a couple weeks ago, and I was filming that, and film is such a game changer for you individually, as if you're working with a coach, both of you to look at. But I'm always impacted by the athletes who will video themselves and then say, I had no idea I was moving so fast. And you don't until, and I will tell you, when I did martial arts, when I've trained competitive shooting, the video analysis, tennis, another sport that I've done video analysis for, man, it just changes your whole perspective, because what you think you're doing and what you are doing are two different things. So we were filming somebody doing hip thrusts, and from the side, everything looked hunky-dory, looked perfectly balanced. And then I filmed it straight on, and you could see that the athlete was pulling one hip over the other and favoring. And so we after she was done with the set, we talked about it and she said, oh yeah, that's because I have a spinal imbalance. And so it was very interesting, though, to see that on film, that differential, and you may not be aware of that if you don't have somebody looking at you, but also if you don't have somebody looking at you, you can do the video part of it and just see.
And get different angles.
That's right.
Yeah, and I love when athletes send training footage, like, wow, this was not what I thought this looked like, right? And that's so, like, we're really good at educating our athletes, I feel like. So I love when they almost give me the feedback to give back to them. Like, that's a great athlete, right? That's an athlete that's taking their time, they're listening. We did like 60 new videos this winter for our Trainer Eyes, our training app with the FitBody Fusion 2.0 videos. And I know
they've been a game changer.
We need another 60, but
we do.
Probably more than 60, but yeah. But it's good, like when the girls are listening to them, watching those cues and then putting them through, then submitting videos like, whoa, that's not what I thought that looked like. That's awesome, right? So, and a lot of times, when athletes struggle with a movement, it takes some critical thinking. And I like it when an athlete will critically think and be like, okay, what am I doing wrong here? Coming back to me like, hey, I'm feeling X, Y, Z. I'm thinking this or this. What do you think? Like that's when I love to just like pause my day on check-ins. I'll get on a FaceTime video. I did a couple of FaceTime videos with Angie Kaufman Friday. And where were we? Seattle this weekend, and she was giving me great insight on her hinges, and we stopped. I was like, you still at the gym? She's like, yep, I'm on my rest, FaceTime, and worked through it. Like, it's just because they're getting to that level, and that's what's needed. And she's somebody that struggled with back pain, and right now it seems like things are good for her back, and we've kind of really troubleshooted some things, and she's gone from not trying to lift the 80-pound dumbbells to do her dumbbell RDLs down in like the 60s, and it's working for her. So I just think that's
communication is so crucial. I mean, I can't drive that home enough, because we had another athlete that didn't tell us and then ended up, having some issues. And it's like, if you were having some pain, there's no way we can know that's happening or figure out what's going on. So, that's one big thing is like, pay attention to what's going on in your body, communicate. If there's something that's painful, we're not talking about training pain that's appropriate. We're talking about something doesn't feel right.
Orthopedic, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You're not feeling it in the right place, maybe. Like, there's just something going on. You're inappropriately sore. We need to hit the pause button, figure out what's going on. Don't just ignore it and feel like, oh, I'm beast. I gotta.
Yeah. Or when they'll send me videos and that all looks good, and then they don't tell you in a check-in that they're not recovering and things like that. Well, that's where like our collaborative coaching work. Like, okay, maybe I need to pull back a little bit. Maybe they need more food or whatever. there's always a solution.
Might be time for a deload or a refeed or but we don't know unless the communication's there. If you're like, I feel great.
as we've said, the most successful athletes are the ones that give you proper feedback and tell you what's going on. And you should, I say this with a little bit of caution, you should be able to differentiate what is pain from muscle contraction, muscle work, from pain that is a joint or a potential tear or a sprain or something like that. We do not want that. We absolutely do not want that. If you're experiencing that, stop the movement. Stop the movement and talk to your coach or talk to somebody, because that shouldn't happen. And this whole notion of training through injury, man, I am not an advocate of that at all. That can produce muscular imbalance. It can prolong your injury. It can aggravate the injury. It can produce another injury. Every time I've hurt myself, I was training because I thought I should just push through the pain, and it resulted in a surgery almost every time. So I can't emphasize that enough, that as we talk about the feedback that you're giving, just make sure that you train smart. This train hard concept, I want you to train hard, but the way to train hard is by training smart.
Few days off is much better than a surgery and 6 months of
months
recovery
off.
time.
Right. I say that too with athletes if they're sick or they feel like they're getting sick.
Right.
Like training acutely suppresses your immune system. So if you feel like you're coming down with something, I would
get worse.
Take a rest day. See how you feel tomorrow.
Not
Are
gonna
we
be the end of the
trending
world.
better? If we're trending better, maybe take another rest day and then hit it the third day. But if we're sick, do not train. And then obviously this is the gym owner in me as well. Like,
you're spreading your germs.
Please don't come to the gym
sick.
sick.
It's disrespectful. And if you have your home gym, it's the same concept. Just don't do it. You're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're compromising your system even more. And we talked about this but I think it's a message that we could deliver every week and still have people who think that they need to push through. So all good. Man, this is a good discussion. And as good a discussion as this was, I feel like we only touched the surface of it. But so the 3 points that you covered was abductor versus adductor. You covered anterior pelvic tilt and thoracic rotation or thoracic mobility.
Yeah, and that's right now, right? I'd love to come back on, maybe in the spring. And as we continue to compile data of these in-person evals and what we're seeing, maybe it shifts. I would love nothing more than the stuff we're putting out start to see some of these dysfunctions start to diminish. That would be a perfect scenario for us, right? If more athletes are in tune with what's happening and understanding the why. But that's something that we have that a lot of teams don't, is this aggregate data of true novice to Olympian level.
And that's something I really want to hit on before we go, is we talked about collaborative coaching in the first episode that we did with you. But I want to just emphasize that, man, we do that with training footage a lot, where we will put training footage up, and I'm always impressed by the fact that I may not see something, but another coach will. I was having an athlete that was doing single leg standing kickbacks, and I could not identify. Her feedback was, I feel it more on one side than the other. And man, I looked at that footage for a half hour, ran it through some even video analysis software, still couldn't see it. Adair actually walked in, and I said, Adair, will you take a look at this? And so she did. She said, oh yeah, she's opening up her hip just slightly on that one side, which was the side that corresponded to what she was not feeling it as much. It's like, bam, that was it. So there's no perfection in this sport. There is the pursuit of perfection to achieve excellence. And that's really where we're at. That's a Vince Lombardi quote, I think. But anyway, what's your checkout word? Sorry.
It's not just one word. It's inspired. Our coaches inspire me.
I agree.
Watching our coaches continue, Yvette, for example, like she helps me so much with the training footage. I remember when we did her eval earlier when I got here, and she soaked every bit of that session up and more. And it's nice to know, like, when if I'm crazy in a weekend and I need help, I can lean on Yvette to help me with training footage review, because she knows, she studied it. And like, there's a lot of our coaches are studying this training footage review, and we're seeing it, it's paying off. We're winning 35 up overalls every week. We're winning multiple overalls somewhere in the country each week. And it's not just Jamie, right? It's all of the coaches on the team, continue to level up and continuing to, I don't know. In some ways, I feel like we're trying to chase you, like at coaches. Like we're trying to chase after Coach Jamie here. And
I'm like, pass me up, guys. Like
the
that's
funny
my
part
goal.
of it is that I just know her, and this goes
I
in
know.
with the fact that she's a tremendous leader, is that she wants people to
For
do
sure.
that.
I know she does.
And
Yeah.
Drew, I would say this about you: you want people to get to that level. It's you've expressed the fact that you rely on Javi to help solve problems, and we've had great discussions, and it's just like, when you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And we really pride ourselves on wanting to really be curious thinkers, approach this from a critical mindset. And man, you've said this many times, that the more knowledge you get, the more questions you have.
Yeah.
And as a competitor, we want you to have that same philosophy, because the day that you think you know something, and if you're working with somebody who thinks they know everything, maybe ask that question. Because if you don't understand the why you're doing something, you are not going to be engaged, and that applies to training, nutrition, every aspect of your plan, and it applies to the larger sphere of your life, which is understand why you're doing something. We do so many things. I think about allergic response to food is we go by and we eat foods that we may be allergic to, but because we've gotten so used to it, we just don't pay attention to those little changes and variations.
You think the feeling poor is normal.
Yeah. Oh, but you're not connecting with the fact that, hey, I do that every time I eat this certain food or whatever. So anyway, these are all good stuff. We could talk for hours on this, and this is a great conversation. Thank you for inspiring us, Drew. Thank you
Every
for
day.
being, you are truly
you,
a
guys.
godsend to us, and you're more than just a partner. You're family, and man, I could go on for hours about how much you mean to us. So thank you.
Same with you guys. I'm just so fortunate. So fortunate.
We'll definitely have you back. There's so much more.
The travel's been rough. We've tried
Yeah.
to do this like 3 times and had to cancel because of just the hectic travel schedules. But
Well, because we're doing what we love.
Yeah, absolutely.
And our dedication to our athletes keeps us sometimes from hitting the pause. But we really do want to share, the knowledge and what we're experiencing and why we're having the successes that we're having, because we feel like, we want to keep growing this industry. We want people to keep enjoying bodybuilding and
beyond the
lifestyle.
wins,
Yeah.
right? This is not just about the wins. This is about making healthier. Our number one prime directive is health first, and that applies to training, nutrition, every aspect of this. But we want our athletes to be healthy. Yes, the wins are fantastic, and I will always take an athlete who has a healthy approach, healthy training, and they are really getting the most out of what they want, because that's what
they're having fun.
That's
like
right.
it is a part of this. And, I love that you brought up the true novice thing, because, we want more people to come and enjoy what we've fallen in love with and are so passionate about. So.
Okay, so that was my fault that this was the longest sign off known to man, but
It's okay.
So remember to like, comment, subscribe, leave your comments. Oh, I said like, comment, so that's duplicative anyway. Like,
You
comment,
like to
subscribe.
change it up each
Yeah,
time anyway.
I do. And
Leave
leave
a
a
review.
review.
That's
That's
the
the one I
one.
was forgetting. Okay, thank you, babe. I don't know what I would do without you, but remember the 3 B's: be good to yourself
Be good to each other.
and be safe. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to FitBody Lifestyle. We hope today's episode has left you feeling motivated and equipped to tackle your fitness goals, business challenges, and the daily dance of life. Remember to value progress over perfection. Life's tough enough alone. Find the chosen family around you to help you along the way.
If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite streaming platform. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at FitBodyFusion.